What's up, comic book fans? It's the man whose ring runs on fanboy energy. It is the Emerald Enthusiast, back with another action figure review. This time I'm taking a look at 3 figures from the McFarlane Blackest Nightwave, and that is Superman, Deathstorm, and Batman. As you can see, these 3 figures are missing the Build-A-Figure, aka Collect and Connect piece, but the department stores in my area, unfortunately, aren't very good at stocking McFarlane, so I have not seen these, and I was offered these basically for the price of what I would have paid for one of these in the wild, so I couldn't pass that up. I thought that they would still make for a very interesting review, especially since now you can see the inside of the packaging more easily. And if you're wondering about Kyle, well, I got Kyle separately with the Build-A-Figure piece, but he now also bears a very important signature. Yes, that is the signature of Kyle's co-creator, Ron Marz. I will put a link in the description below if you want to see how I obtained this figure, but nonetheless, let's take a closer look at the details of these figures now. We get partial windows on the tops and the sides of the packages. On the back bottom, we get shots of all of the trading cards available in this series, as well as this artwork of Atrocitus. On the bottom of the packages, we get some product information. On the sides of the packages, we get the names of the respective characters. Black Lantern, Superman, Deathstorm, and Batman. I'm not sure why Batman is not specified as a Black Lantern, but Superman is. With each of these figures, you can see them clearly through the front window of the packaging. Deathstorm is a little more obscured with the lower body here. You can see his feet if you tip the packaging up, and that's something that I always recommend that collectors do. Get the best look that you can at any figure you're going to buy, because you never know when a figure might have a bad paint job or a reversed joint, and yes, I have seen that on modern figures. So with all that being said, now I think it's time to bust these figures out of the package and see what's inside. Here are the figures free of the outer packaging, but still in the inner plastic. Here's a close-up of the artwork on each of the individual cards. Each of the cards feature a brief biography of their respective characters. Here are close-up shots of the individual biographies on the 3 cards. If you would like to read these, go ahead and pause the video and do so now. And here we see the Black Lantern Corps out of the package and ready to spread death throughout the DC universe. As a fan of zombie stories and a lifelong fan of DC Comics, I just can't get enough of the Blackest Night crossover. And when I heard that McFarlane was dedicating a wave to Blackest Night, I just couldn't wait to pick these up and review them. So let's get a closer look at the loose details of these figures now. So let's start with a look at Superman. I have more gripes about this figure than the other 2, but let me start by talking about the things that I really do like. First of all, this paint choice for the silver sections looks really good. Very exact paint applications with those silver sections, although I do have issue with this symbol, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I really like the way the cape has been sculpted here. Like, it looks, almost like a death shroud. It's very kind of tattered. And I like the fact that it's in 3 different sections. Like it's torn. So I do appreciate that. Good texturing here. That really seems like a uniform. So I like that a lot. Overall, good musculature. I think that McFarlane did a good job with the sculpting, and the body mold looks good. Overall, I think the articulation is good too. With the lower body, we get this midfoot hinge, ankle pivoting, so I appreciate those 2 things. They'll help you get the figure into a sturdy stance. Double jointed knees that you can get to go really far back, so I certainly appreciate that. You can get him into a good running pose. However, there is some limitation with the hips. Now, you can get him to kick forward this far, which that's not great. You can angle his leg out a little more and get him to kick up, but that also seems to stress out this hip piece here. So I'm not sure you'd want to do that and leave it for a long time because you may wrinkle that piece. You can get him to kick out that far, so that's not bad, and I do appreciate the fact that you can get him to step back. In terms of articulation in the arms and the torso, good movement here in the wrist, double jointed elbows, so you can get his arm to go up that far. Butterfly joints in the shoulder area here, so you can get his arms to go up really far, even above his head like that. So that is impressive, and you can get them to rock back like that, so I appreciate that as well. In terms of torso articulation, now this looks like all one piece. It is not. You can see the separation here, and it's a little bit tougher to tell with the hip piece here, but these are 3 different pieces, and that does give him pretty good articulation. Although if you try to crunch him directly, these 2 pieces press against one another. You can get him to rock back pretty well. So I do appreciate the articulation overall in the torso. Also, the sculpting is really good as well as the texturing. But I do have a problem with this symbol. So it's important to remember that this is Kal-El from Earth 2, and his symbol is a little bit more compact than the bold lines that we often see with a Superman symbol, but it still shouldn't look like this. As you can see, this is a really sloppy looking logo, and I would not have expected this out of McFarlane. Like, it's been fused together in a very haphazard way. Like, overall, this shape with the cape looks good. I don't have a problem with that. It's just the way the S is done inside of this that if you didn't know this was an S and you were looking at it with no preconceived notions, you might not even know that this is a letter. So I do appreciate the fact that, once again, the bottom of the symbol is not just painted on. So when you articulate him, the entire symbol goes with the outline of the symbol. So I do appreciate that a lot. But even with the good paint applications here and the paint choice, I'm really disappointed with this symbol. I think this might be the worst symbol that I've seen out of the McFarlane line so far. In terms of the head sculpt, there's a lot more to like than to dislike, but I do have a couple of very minor criticisms, although the paint applications are very well done. You can see how small these eyes are, yet they've been painted very well. The teeth have been expertly executed. You can see they look like they're rotting, like yellowing. And the same goes for the skin on the outside here. You know, you can see all these wrinkles that are sculpted in, and then these little holes. There's been a dark wash given over that to make it look like rotting flesh. Speaking of rotting flesh, you can see that there's just this nasal cavern here. There's no nose. So I certainly appreciate that. Actually, the hair's been sculpted very well. You can see the differentiation in texturing from the front to the back. So overall, this looks really good, very creepy. A couple of just minor points, though. I feel like the skin is a little too light. I feel like it should be more of a grayish color to denote the tissue dying. And also, I feel like the jaw is a little too small. I feel like it should be, pulled downward and outward more, the way we saw Kal-El in the comics when he was a Black Lantern. But really, I mean, again, those are very minor. I mean, I looked at this, and with the issues I have with this figure, none of them are really with the head sculpt. And there's also a good amount of articulation. So I certainly appreciate that. There is head tilting, which I think is really good, really helpful for like zombie-fied characters, because you can get them in that kind of pose. So overall, I don't think this is a bad head sculpt at all. So let's get a look at the Batman figure, and there's a lot to like here as well. For starters, this cape is very well done. You can see all these wrinkles that have been sculpted in. And all these little details that make it look kind of weathered and tattered and aged. You can see that. Actually, you can see it even more so underneath here. The way that's been sculpted and done, that's very good work there. I also like these pointy shoulders. That's a nice touch. And this is actually more lightweight than I thought it would be. In terms of the lower body, actually the entire thing, this texturing is just magnificent. I mean, you can see the light dancing off of this. You know, it looks like some type of like military garment that's very protective. So I certainly appreciate that. In terms of articulation, I like the way the boots are done. Once again, midfoot hinge. You can get pivoting in the ankle here. You can get the ankle to go that far back. When you bring the ankle forward, it does press against the front part of the boot here. So I'd be careful there. Also, when you're articulating the knee joint here, it's a double jointed peg joint there. You want to be careful though, because you don't want to stress the cape too much. So be careful there. In terms of hip articulation, it's a little bit better than Superman. So you can get him to kick forward. And if you angle the leg, you can keep going a little bit. So that's not bad. But again, be careful, because I feel like these two parts are rubbing together and you might damage the figure. So as far as kicking out to the side, that's a pretty good amount of articulation there. And you can get the figure to step back. So let's have a look at the arms and the torso. And again, you can see this magnificent texturing here that runs all the way through the gray sections of the costume. The Black Lantern Corps symbol, very well done here. It wraps, actually, you know, the bat symbol part wraps onto the pectorals very well, so I certainly appreciate that. I like these lines that have been sculpted in. The gloves look really good. There's this pivoting joint here at the wrist. Gives you good movement. You can see all the wrinkles that have been sculpted into the gloves. In terms of articulation at the elbow here, there's a double peg joint, and you can get it to go that far back. So not quite as good as Superman's, but still pretty good. There's also the swivel at the bicep, and you can see here the butterfly joint, and you can get his arms to go up pretty far, but as you would expect, they kind of press against the top of the cape. So you can only get them to come up this far. I certainly wouldn't try to force them, because you don't want to damage the cape, but you do have really good movement up into that point. So you can rotate the arms outward. You can get them to go back like that. So I certainly appreciate that. Like, that's a really like disconcerting pose there. But yeah, just be careful if you try to lift the arms up. You certainly don't want to damage this cape. In terms of torso articulation, you can get him to kind of rock around like this. You can see that's a good amount of movement there. Not too much of a separation there. There's a little bit, and it's more pronounced here in the back. But, I mean, that's covered by the cape, so I don't think that's a major problem. You can get the lower part of the torso to articulate a little bit as well. So if you want to get him in kind of a slumped over pose like this, something like that, the articulation in the torso will certainly help you do that. So this head sculpt has been very well executed. Really, outside of the coloring on the flesh part, which, much like the Superman figure, I feel like this should be darker. But other than that, there's not much to criticize here. I like the details on the tongue, these yellowing teeth, this kind of taut skin around the mouth and the cheekbones there. The cowl has been sculpted very well. You know, it's the kind of cowl that doesn't have the huge ears, but you can see the various sections of it. I like the way that looks. The neck has been sculpted very well with the cape around it, kind of wrapping around there. And as you can see with the articulation, this is just next level articulation. I mean, you can get him into that kind of pose, which just looks really creepy. So, yeah, I wish all of the McFarlane heads moved like this. I mean, you can do just about anything. And underneath there is the little dumbbell joint in the head. So I'm going to need to pop that back on now. So I was able to do that with ease. Here's a quick look at the back of the cowl. And yeah, I just want to reiterate, this is a really great head sculpt. Really, outside of the coloring, there's not much that I have to say that's negative. So before I get to Deathstorm, this is the accessory that comes with the figure. He actually does have this in the comic, but I feel like the lantern part is a little undersized in comparison to the handle, although I will give McFarlane credit for not making a handle that seems like it's fragile. So I really wish there was some translucent plastic in the middle as well. But overall, I like the paint choice. I think it's very fitting. So again, this is a mixed bag, but I am glad that this was included. So let's take a look at Deathstorm here. And while this figure is not perfect, he is my favorite of the three. I do like the texturing on the figure here. It's a more simplistic paint job than the others, but I still like the way it was executed, with the exception of the symbol here, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I do like all of this detail here. It does look like, you know, decomposing flesh. So I certainly appreciate that. Again, midfoot hinge, movement on the ankle. This one seems a little bit tighter than the other two. You can get the ankle to move forward and back. Double jointed knees. And without this figure having a cape, you can get to go pretty far back. So I certainly appreciate that. Good sculpting on the quadriceps here. The boots look really good. I like the paint application here on the quadriceps. In terms of articulation, you can get him to kick outward pretty far, kind of like we saw with Batman. You can get him to kick forward, but again, you run into this same thing that we talk about with a lot of McFarlane figures when reviews are done, that you really can't get him to kick straight outward without stressing out this pliable hip piece. So just be careful if you're doing stop motion or a diorama. You certainly don't want to damage a figure this nice, but you can get the figure to step back, so I certainly do appreciate that. So let's have a look at the torso and arms, and really my biggest problem with this figure is the way the symbol is done. I don't understand why they included this blue. It almost looks unfinished. Like, I don't understand why they couldn't have used the silver or white or something like that. Like, I've looked at the symbol and this is not accurate. So I don't understand why they used this light blue paint, because it just doesn't look like it belongs. But outside of that, this is done very well. These lines that are coming out from the symbol. And again, good texturing here. This figure has better articulation in the lower abdomen than the others. And also a good amount with the upper abdomen here, the upper torso. There's not a lot of separation with these sections, so I certainly appreciate that. Good sculpting in the abdominals and the pectorals. So really, outside of this paint choice, which I really wish they hadn't done, there's not much negative to say about the torso. As we take a look at the arms here, lots of good sculpting. You can see all of these wrinkles that have been sculpted in. The gloves look really good. Again, double jointed elbows. Bicep swivel. This one's a little tight. He does have the butterfly joint, although you've got to be careful because of these shoulder pieces, which I do appreciate. I like the way these look. But you can get his arm to go out this far, and then it presses against that shoulder piece, so be careful. If you want to rotate the arm, you can do it at an angle like this, but you certainly wouldn't want to try to like raise it up too high and press against that piece. But nonetheless, I like the musculature on these arms. I think they're done really well. This hand will hold the personal power battery. And also, I guess if you want to get him to throw a football, you can. And with this hand, you can get him to quote Shakespeare. So this head sculpt is astounding. I love all of the details on this. I love this gray shade that they use for the skull part. I feel like this is the type of shade that they should use on all of the skin of the Black Lanterns. But I like all of these individual teeth, this nasal cavern. You can see how deep these ocular sockets are, even though there's eyes in them. And they've been painted very well. You see all these like stark lines, these sharp corners for the sculpt. That looks really good. And this translucent plastic that they use for the flame, that is just magnificent. You can see all of the details on this. All these little edges. I mean, it looks like, kind of rippling flame. That just looks really good. In terms of articulation, there is a little bit of limitation. You can get him to look side to side somewhat. And maybe mine's especially tight, but I can't get him to look side to side too much. I can get him to look up and down. And there's a little bit of tilting. But I certainly wouldn't want to damage this figure, so be careful. It does feel like turning the head is something that's a little risky, but overall, I just really appreciate the work that went into this head sculpt. So last but not least, we need to talk about the rings, and this is an area where I think McFarlane needs to make improvements when it comes to lantern-centric figures across the board. As you can see from a distance, both with Deathstorm and Batman, it's difficult to see the rings. With Kal-El here, he wears the ring on his left hand during Blackest night, and the ring is not there. And I'm not sure why they'd make a Black Lantern Superman and not put a Black Lantern Corps ring on him. But nonetheless, let's get a close-up of the rings on these two figures. So as you can see, the rings have been sculpted onto the hands. They're not just paint. You can see the edges, the shape of the rings, but they're still undersized and they just don't stand out. So McFarlane really has some work to do in making the rings seem like they're central to the character in the way that they present them. I certainly hope you have enjoyed this review. If so, please like, subscribe, and tell a friend to do the same. Stay tuned for some articulation shots, and also remember to catch me on the Multiverse Musings vidcast, available right here on YouTube. And I'll be back to the internet with more comic book related content soon. But until we meet again, this has been the Emerald Enthusiast, and thanks for watching.